The activities of the missionaries. British plans for Jewish colonization in Palestine. Missionaries provided another means of foreign penetration in the Arab East. In the 1840s they revived their activities which had abated at the beginning of the century. The missionaries opened schools and charity organizations in Syria and Palestine, zealously spreading Christianity and with it the influence of the countries they represented. The first and most active missionaries in the East were the Lazarists and Jesuits. Supervised by the Vatican and vigorously supported by France, they had a wide network of schools and seminaries at their disposal. In 1846, the Pope restored the Latin Jerusalem Patriarchate, which had existed at the time of the Crusades. The first Americans, Presbyterians, appeared in Beirut in 1820. By 1860, they had over 30 schools and a printing shop, and in 1866 they opened the Syrian Protestant College, later to become the American University. In 1849, Russia set up a Russian Orthodox mission in Jerusalem. She did not have any directly aggressive plans in Syria and Palestine, but merely wanted to strengthen her influence over the Greek Orthodox population of the Balkan Peninsula. England, who was eager to make the best of Muhammad Ali's defeat, was not to be left behind. She staked on two cards at once. On the one hand, she backed the Protestants and the plans for German colonization in Palestine, an Anglo-Prussian diocese being established in Jerusalem in 1841. On the other hand, England encouraged the plans for Jewish colonization and initiated all sorts of Zionist projects. The Jewish population of Palestine in the middle of the 19th century hardly numbered 11,000. Many of them were pilgrims and had settled here for religious purposes. During the Eastern Crisis of 1839–41, the British reverted to Bonaparte's plans for the creation of a Jewish state in Jerusalem. In 1838, Lord Shaftesbury and then Gawler and the British Council in Palestine, James Finn, put forward a number of projects for the transfer of the Jews to Palestine and the creation there of a Jewish state under British protection. These plans were welcomed by Lord Palmerston, who regarded them as a guarantee of the safety of imperial communications. Sir Moses Montefiore, a British banker related to the Rothschild family, also supported these plans. Montefiore visited the East several times and even bought an orange grove near Jaffa in 1855, but was unable to attract a single Jewish colonist. The plans of the Anglo-Prussian diocese also fell through. The rivalry of the powers in the East was reflected in the endless bickering between the various missions over the holy places, the distribution of the money and gifts received from pilgrims, and so on. One such seemingly insignificant conflict, the argument over repairs to the roof of the Holy Sepulchre and the keys to the Bethlehem Shrine, grew into a serious international crisis and gave rise to the Eastern War of 1853–56. Although Turkey was among the victors and included in the concert of European powers, the war had a disastrous effect on the Ottoman Empire. In 1854, to cover its military expenses, the Porte concluded its first foreign loan, which marked the beginning of Turkey's financial enslavement. Ultimately, the powers established a kind of joint protectorate and dictated a new program of reforms to the Turkish Sultan, which completely cleared the way for the penetration of foreign capital in Turkey. The Hadiyatun of 1856, the second period of the Tanzimat. Under pressure from the European powers, on February 18, 1856, shortly before the conclusion of peace, the Sultan issued a new imperial rescript, Hadi Humayun. Formally, the imperial rescript confirmed the main stipulations of the Hadi Sharif Gulhain, noble rescript, by continuing the Tanzimat policy. Actually, things were different. The powers regarded the Hadi Humayun of 1856, unlike the Hadi Sharif of 1839, as an international obligation, and it was mentioned thus in Article 9 of the Paris Peace Treaty signed on March 30, 1856. Actually, the Sultan could neither annul nor alter it without the approval of the powers. If the first manifesto deprived foreign diplomacy of an excuse to interfere in the Ottoman Empire's internal affairs, the second encouraged it. In the Hadi Humayun of 1856, unlike the Hadi Sharif Gulhain, the stress was on religious equality and various economic undertakings. This played into the hands of the European powers, who demanded that the rights be extended to cover their subjects and commercial agents, most of whom came from the Christian, Armenian and Greek merchant class. The Porte made its first concessions to the powers during the Eastern War, when it attempted to apply the recruitment laws to the Christians, and with this in view on May 7, 1855, abolished the carriage. This move met with opposition both from the Muslim reactionaries, who were displeased that infidels should be allowed to serve in the army and to receive arms, and from the infidels themselves, who refused to serve in the Turkish army. In the end, the Porte exempted the Christians from military service, having introduced in its stead a special tax called Bidul el-Askari, military exoneration tax, which was really the same as the carriage only under a different name. Apart from the carriage, in the Ottoman Empire there were many other medieval taxes, which continued to grow from year to year. The introduction of state monopolies on salt and tobacco in 1862 increased the burden, and prices of these products rose. The tax farmers continued to collect the taxes. The tax farming system was abolished in 1857, but not for long. On April 21, 1858, a land law was issued, legally abolishing the military fief system and the peasant dependence on the former Timurids. Actually, the system had been liquidated long before the law was issued. The peasants, however, were as usual deprived of land. The new law did not give the peasants land, it merely granted the leaseholders of the state lands the right to buy the lands for a large sum. The land law widened the category of privately owned lands, promoted the development of private land ownership, and made it a part of commodity circulation. At the same time, the law retained many restrictions on the use of the land, which hampered economic initiative. In 1867, a new law was passed granting foreigners the right to acquire and own land in the Ottoman Empire. Apart from the land legislation, the laws on the Ottoman Bank, 1856, and the granting of concessions, in the second stage of the Tanzimat, laws were promulgated on the rights and position of religious communities and on Ottoman citizenship, 1869. Criminal and civil codes were compiled. A law on the secularization of the Waqfs, 1873, remained ink on paper. A law on the Elyets was passed on November 8, 1864, introducing a new administrative division of the empire and reorganizing local administration. On the whole, the reforms of the second period of the Tanzimat weakened the Porte and accelerated the penetration of foreign capital. The European capitalists received bank, railway and other concessions, the right to buy land, and so on. Thus, the Hadi Humayun, imperial rescript of 1856 and the laws issued after it turned the Ottoman Empire into a semi-colony of the European capitalist powers. It ushered in the second period of the Tanzimat, when Turkey and her Arab domains were plundered and enslaved by foreign capital. The Peasant Uprising in KSRUAN, 1859–60. Soon after the publication of the Hadi Humayun of 1856, a new crisis arose in Syria. The immediate cause was the publication of the Hadi Humayun, which the Lebanese peasants interpreted as a sign of their social equality and exoneration from feudal obligations. The growth of foreign trade in marketable agricultural produce in the 40s and 50s of the 19th century intensified the exploitation of the Lebanese peasants. Discontent in the villages grew. The peasants wrote complaints against the growing extortions and abuses. At the beginning of 1858, at a big gathering in the village of Zuk, where about 300 persons had gathered from different villages of Kesrouan, northern Lebanon, all the complaints were made up into a single petition, which a special delegation handed over to the Beirut governor, Khurshid Pasha. The peasants demanded the liquidation of all feudal obligations. The Pasha politely, but firmly refused to comply with their demands. The peasants then began to prepare for an uprising. They fetched the weapons they had hidden 12 years ago and began to form insurgent detachments. In January 1859, an armed uprising headed by the village blacksmith, Tanius Shayan, flared up. The uprising was of a purely class character. Having driven the Maronite feudal lords out of Kesruan and seized their land and property, the insurgent peasants set up their own rule and the Porte was compelled to acknowledge Shayan as King Makim. The Kesruan uprising had a revolutionary effect on the other regions of the Lebanon. The disturbances spread to Latakia and the central Lebanon and involved the Maronite peasants of the Druze King Makimate, where the peasants, actively supported by the Maronite clergy, began to prepare for an armed uprising against the Druzes. The Druze feudal lords in their turn began to arm the Druze irregulars. The Druze Maronite massacre of 1860. In the spring of 1860, the uprising grew into a new Druze Maronite massacre. The provocative actions of the French council in Beirut were partly to blame for this. Marx noted that French agents who were bestirring themselves to bring about a politico-religious row on the Syrian coast, New York Daily Tribune, August 11, 1860, were involved in the bloody events in Syria. On May 22, 1860, a group of 10 or 12 Maronites fired on a group of Druzes at the entrance to Beirut, killing 1 and wounding 2. This is all that was needed. Druzes and Maronites began slaughtering each other and fires and pogroms swept through the Lebanon. In a mere 3 days, from May 29 to 31, 1860, 60 villages were destroyed in the vicinity of Beirut. In June, the disturbances spread to the mixed neighborhoods of the southern Lebanon and anti-Lebanon, to Saida, Hasbaiya, Razaiya, Deir el-Kamer and Zal. The Druze peasants laid siege to Catholic monasteries and missions, burned them and killed the monks. In July 1860, in Damascus, with the connivance of the military authorities and Turkish soldiers, Muslim fanatics organized pogroms, killing Christians and setting fire to churches and missionary schools. This lasted for 3 days, from July 9 till July 11. But thanks to the popular Algerian hero, Abd el-Kader, who lived as an exile in Damascus, a mass extermination of the Christians was averted. He defended the Christians during the pogroms and placed his palace at the disposal of the victims of fanaticism. The bloody events of 1860 cost the Syrian people dear. Over 20,000 Christians were killed in 380 Christian villages, 560 churches and 40 monasteries were destroyed. The Druzes and Muslims also suffered heavy losses. The French expedition of 1860-61. The pogroms and the Druze Maronite massacre gave the French Emperor Napoleon III the long-awaited excuse for intervention. The French ruling circles felt that the right time had come to gain complete possession of Syria. Napoleon III's desire to raise his prestige as the most Christian king and internal and foreign policy considerations also played an important role. In July 1860, he suddenly spoke out in defense of the Syrian Christians and made known his intention of sending troops to Syria. France's plans put the powers and Turkey on their guard. Sultan Abdulmajid tried to prevent the French expedition by sending one of the empire's highest dignitaries, Fuad Pasha, to Damascus. Having received emergency powers, Fuad organized an exemplary mass execution in Damascus. On his orders 111 persons were shot, 57 hanged, 325 sentenced to hard labor and 145 were banished. Fuad Pasha hoped to please France by punishing only the Muslims. The Turkish troops quickly restored law and order and stopped the pogroms. But the Bonaparte press continued to rage, describing Fuad's repressions as a mere comedy and demanding that the executions be doubled. England and Russia, who were reluctant to permit the capture of Syria by the French, insisted on the convocation of an international conference to tie Napoleon down. On September 5, 1860, 6 powers, England, Russia, France, Austria, Prussia and Turkey, signed an agreement restricting the size of the French occupation corps to 12,000 men and its stay in Syria to 6 months. Moreover, the signatory powers sent special commissioners to Syria to make an on-the-spot investigation of the causes of the Syrian events, expose the culprits, punish them and prevent a repetition of such events by the institution of the Lebanese statute, Règlement Organique. After the setting up of an international commission, the French idea of sending troops to Syria lost all meaning. On the very eve of the signing of the agreement, however, at the end of August 1860, French troops landed at Beirut. In September, they made a tour of the country subdued by the Turks. Having performed this feat of arms, the French generals then directed their ardor against the insurgent Fellahin of the northern Lebanon. The leader of the Maronite peasants was forced to flee to the mountains. Yusuf Karim, the feudal leader who with France's help had suppressed the uprising in Kesrouan and returned the land to the Maronite sheikhs, became Kaymakam. Napoleon III attempted to evade the agreement of September 5, 1860, and keep his troops in Syria under the pretext that the situation in the area was still insecure, but England and Austria threatened war and demanded the immediate withdrawal of the French forces. In the end, a withdrawal date was fixed for June 5, 1861, by which time the French Expeditionary Corps was embarked on ships and sent home. The French attempt to take over Syria had fallen through. The Reglementorganique of the Lebanon. In June 1861, after lengthy arguments, the International Commission worked out a new Reglement Organique of the Lebanon. It was drawn up in the form of a convention and signed by Turkey and the powers on June 9, 1861, in Constantinople. The mountain region, excluding the seacoast, became an autonomous region with the Christian governor at its head. The governor was independent of the Beirut and Damascene Pashas but directly subordinate to the Porte. The system of 2 Kaymakams was abolished. The governor, Mutasarrif, was chosen and appointed directly by the Porte. An administrative council composed of 12 men was set up under the governor. Each of the 6 religious groups inhabiting the Lebanon, Maronites, Druzes, Sunnites, Shias, Greek Orthodox and Greek Uniates, elected 2 members to the council. The council received the right to distribute taxes, to control their gathering and expenditure. It also had the right to consult on any question. The region was divided into 6 mudirs with mudirs at their head. 3 of them were Maronites, 1 a Druze, 1 a Greek Orthodox and 1 a Greek Uniate. The sheikhs of the nahiyas and villages, the judges and scribes were subordinate to them. The statute determined the degree of power to be exercised by each religious group. District councils were formed under each mudir. A special police force and judicial system were created for the mountain region with Deir el-Kamar as its center. The governor had the right to disarm the population of the Lebanon and call in Turkish forces. The Lebanon undertook to pay an annual tribute to the Porte. The Reglement Organique was introduced preliminarily for a period of 3 years. In September 1864, the powers in Turkey signed a convention which confirmed the permanent character of the statute and made minor changes in it. Another Maronite district was formed and the council under the governor was reorganized. It now had 12 members, 4 Maronites, 3 Druzes, 3 Greek Orthodoxes and Greek Uniates, 1 Sunnite and 1 Shia. The Reglement Organique of the Lebanon remained in this form up till 1914. The Enlightenment movement of the 1860s. BUTRUSELBUSDANI. The development of foreign trade led to the emergence in Beirut of a significant strata of the commercial bourgeoisie. However, feudal oppression, the age-long enmity between the tribes and the feudal cliques, between the numerous religious groups and sects hindered the development of trade and the formation of a single national market. In the struggle of the commercial bourgeoisie for Syrian unity, many outstanding ideologies came to the fore. They called for religious tolerance, the unification of all Syrian Arabs regardless of their religious or tribal affiliation. The most outstanding Syrian bourgeois ideologist in the 60s of the 19th century was Boutros el-Bastani, 1819–1883. A Christian, he had studied at a Maronite seminary and knew many languages. In 1840, he became acquainted with the American missionaries and adopted the Presbyterian faith. He advocated patriotism and called for Syrian unity. He castigated religious intolerance and fanaticism, religious strife and enmity, superstitious beliefs, feudal separatism, the corruption of the Turkish authorities and the enslavement of women. He was a tireless enlightener, teacher, publicist and writer. He founded in Beirut the first national Arabic school, 1863, and published 2 weeklies in the Arabic language Nafar Suriya, Clarion of Syria in 1860, and Al-Jannah, Paradise, and the magazine Al-Jinan in 1870, publications that for the first time acquainted Syrian readers with political, cultural and literary questions. He worked a great deal to develop a new literary Arabic language and to spread the European sciences among Arab intellectuals. He compiled a big dictionary of the Arabic language and an Arabic encyclopedia in 7 volumes, Dairat al-Ma'arif. His cousin, Sulaiman el-Bastani, continued the encyclopedia after his death and translated Homer's Iliad into Arabic. Boutros el-Bastani's closest friend and associate was Nassif Yazahi, 1800–1871, the court poet of Bashir II. He also made a great contribution to the revival of the literary Arabic language and Arabic literature. A Christian like Bastani, Nassif Yazahi opposed religious fanaticism and called on the Arabs to unite in brotherhood on the basis of their common heritage. Bastani and Yazahi rallied the most progressive Syrian intellectuals of the time. In 1857, their followers founded in Beirut the Syrian Scientific Society, which for the first time in Syrian history united Arab intellectuals irrespective of their religion. But foreign missionaries were not admitted to the society. Bastani and Yazahi confined themselves to the Enlightenment movement and regarded Enlightenment as the only means of struggle against feudalism. Political problems were advanced by the new generation. At clandestine meetings of the Syrian Scientific Society, which in 1868 revived its activities that had been interrupted by the events of 1860, discussions on cultural renaissance were replaced by fervent calls to struggle for independence. At one such meeting, Nassif Yazahi's son, Ibrahim Yazahi, recited patriotic poems, which had a wide circulation in Syria and the Lebanon. In his poems Ibrahim Yazahi sang of the glorious past of the Arabs, castigated fanaticism and called upon the people to shake off the Turkish yoke. This was a passionate call to rise in the name of the Arab nation. By the sword may distant aims be attained. Seek with it, if you mean to succeed, Yazahi said.